Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting and leadership so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And I have almost never had a guest on twice. I think I've done it once or twice, but today was worth doing it again. Aaron Levy was on the show. The response was great. I'm a fan. And I wanted to have him back because he is the author of a newly published book, which we're going to talk about. Aaron's based in Chicago, and he leads a firm called Raise the Bar Consulting, which we're going to talk about. But essentially, he helps companies figure out this whole millennial talent thing, which I haven't figured out yet. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then more directly and importantly, he's the author of a new book, just came out, Open, Honest, and Direct, a guide to unlocking your team's potential. Open, honest, and direct. So with all that, welcome to the show again, Aaron.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you for having me back on. It's an honor to hear that you haven't brought many guests on, so I'm thrilled and honored to be here.
Let's start with open, honest, and direct, and that would imply that many leaders are not open, honest, and direct. I happen to agree with you. Tell me where this came from. What was the insight that led you to decide to write a book about it and to start to talk about it and have this discussion?
Yeah, it's an accumulation of the work that we at Raise the Bar have been doing over the last 3 years and my experience with leadership and leading over the last decade. And it's actually the best description of all that we do with clients, kind of the life cycle of how we work and what we've seen and experienced. And it is tough to be open, honest, and direct. It's scary to give feedback. It's scary to receive feedback even when we ask for it. And so
it almost seems harder to give it.
Yeah, it does. And oftentimes when we're working with our clients and we're hearing this from our clients, and these are CEOs of large, fast-growing companies here in Chicago and around the country and the world. And you don't want to hurt somebody else. You don't want to make someone feel bad. But then when we ask people, well, what does success look like? Right? Success looks like we're moving forward, moving fast, we're moving in great directions. And that requires giving the gift of feedback. And so it's this whole dialogue that we as leaders have a difficult time doing and feeling comfortable. And I certainly have fallen into that gap too, of not wanting to give feedback that might be critical of somebody or forgetting to give feedback that might help somebody else grow that's positive. But either way, the way in which we can really grow as leaders is being open, honest, and direct. It's tough to do, but it's critically important.
Yep. It is the number one job of a leader, isn't it? To recruit the right people and then to get the most out of them, which requires giving open feedback and being honest and direct with them.
Yeah, I'll give you two thoughts on that. And I'm so aligned with what you said, Jeff. And I was literally just on the phone with a client 5 minutes before this, and last week was working with a client just on this. And as a leader, whether you're the CEO, the founder, or a leader of a team or someone running the team. And when you're in that leadership role, there's really two things you're responsible for. Clarity, and that's clarity on where we're going, what are we doing, and even how are we working together? Like, what are the ground rules by which we're going to work on this project? Is it okay to cut corners and cheat? Is integrity really, like, what are those ground rules by which we work together? Often terms, those are called values within a company, but we talk about them as team agreements, even just on a team.
Yep.
That's clarity, but then there's also context. Why, right? Why are we doing what we're doing? What's important about it? Why does it matter? And so if you think about your role as a leader, it's providing those two things. And that is all about being open, honest, direct, and clear with people. And, when you break it down in that way, it can seem simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy.
And the difficulty of that, like you said, is we don't want to hurt people's feelings. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, why people don't take the time to do it, right? So they let it accumulate, it builds up like barnacles on a boat until eventually it sinks the boat.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? One, we don't take the time to do it. I love it's not that it's partially that we're afraid of giving feedback, but it's also, it takes time to be thoughtful about the feedback that you give, right? It's
you got to think about it and plan it out. How am I going to convey it? To have the discussion, then you got to follow up on the discussion. And it's just easier to tell someone to do what to do and micromanage them and babysit them, or not do it at all.
Yeah. It's easier. It'll take me less time to do the work myself if somebody's not doing it than it will to to actually give someone feedback. And sometimes it's, what I talk about, it's like football, right? You see somebody who's in the wrong spot. You're not going to send them an email. You're not going to wait 20 minutes. Yeah. You're going to tell them the feedback right there in the moment, right? Tom Brady's going to tell his wide receiver, move the F over, right? Because they're working towards a common goal. And we want to create what we try and have our leaders do that go through our training and get certified as open, honest, and direct leaders is we want them to start to create the psychological safety in the space that they can shout when they need to shout and just say, hey, move. Or they have to, they know that they can take a step back and give more thoughtful feedback when they need to too. There's a time and a place for both. So
it's a bit of situational leadership, right? So let's make this actionable and practical for the listener because it sounds obvious, sounds easy, sounds important, none of which, it's not easy, like you said, or it's simple but not easy. What was one thing as you started to frame this and write the book that most people get wrong or misunderstand about how to be honest, how to be open, how to be direct? Where do they get it wrong?
It's a really good question. I'm going to give you a tactical answer, and then I'm going to give you a thought answer too.
Yeah.
Some of the things they get wrong is they think there's like a whole lot that needs to be done. I was literally just talking to a client today where they were talking about how their leaders are bitching about something that's going on and blaming somebody else. And the direct action that we talked about is call them out when you see them doing that in the moment and say, how does this bitching actually help get to the better outcome that we all want?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's seeing something and saying something, and you don't need to be a jerk about it. You can just be direct and say, hey, Jeff, I hear you. And how does what you're complaining about right now help drive the outcome that you want to achieve?
And should you do that even if there are others around? Because I guess I always learned you don't give feedback publicly. You do it privately. Did I not learn that correct? Which is very possible.
So, there's several ways around this. And one of the things that we work with leaders to set up is how do you actually create a space, a set of agreements for how you work together, right? So a great example is I might hit a ball at you as hard as I can, and you're likely not going to be happy with me, right? But then if I say, Jeff, we're playing tennis, I say, oh, are you as mad at me as you were 5 seconds ago? Probably not, because there's an established context set of rules that we're agreeing to. And in tennis, you hit the ball at the person as hard as you can, and that's just how the game's played.
Right.
But Jeff, you might think we're playing tennis. Someone else might think we're playing solitaire. Someone else might think we're playing work. Yeah. And because of that, you don't have the space set up for you to be your authentic self in giving and receiving that.
So as a team, you should have that discussion, and you should say, look, we give feedback publicly or we don't give feedback publicly, like literally have that discussion.
Mm-hmm. And I would say even further, it's what are the things, when we talk about agreements, what are the 3 to 5 tenets that we need to agree on for how we're going to work best as a team? And I tell you, I do this when we do, 3-month trainings where we work with people for 20 hours. And even 20 hours, that's not that much time.
Yeah.
At a boot camp of 20 hours isn't that much time, but we set agreements and we hold each other to those in that time. So even if you're not leading, managing a team for years, right, and you're leading a project team where you're working on a project for the next 2 months, it's important to set those ground rules of what you can expect from one another. Like if we see something, say something, okay, then great, then we all know we do that. Another great agreement is assume positive intent. So that if you do something that actually can frustrate me or make my job harder or make me look bad, I know that if I hold on to the agreement of assume positive intent, I know Jeff's not doing it to hurt me. He's doing it to do his best, because the truth at the end of the day is that's what we're all doing. We're all just trying to be at our best.
I guess where I'm confused is in all this discussion around recruiting a diverse team, diverse in all ways, different people on that team are going to have different ground rules of how this is to be done. So how do we even begin the discussion? How do we get past that rule setting or expectation setting process? Some people are going to say, no, I don't like to be chewed out publicly. Others are going to say, no, come on, give it to me now in person. I don't care if others are around. Does the leader just decide, or how do you get past that?
Great question. And by the way, I'm holding on to the tactical. We'll get there. I'll give some tactical, like best bets and tips around this. But these are good questions. So I want to keep diving in here. One is they're called team agreements for a reason, because the team has to agree to hold them together. And so you have an open dialogue, not about, hey, what do I need? What do we need as a team to operate at our best? Now, within that, there might be some people that say, yeah, I don't like getting feedback in public, even positive feedback, because that makes me very uncomfortable, right? That's not good. Those are things as the leader of the team that you do need to know individually. There are different circumstances for individual people.
Right.
But there are some things as a team where, if you're debriefing a sales call or a recruiting meeting and then say, hey, that interview, what didn't work about that interview? And if we're talking about we need to find and work towards the best outcome in the moment, right? That's one of our agreements. Then we need to talk about what didn't work. We're not going to blame Jeff for what he didn't do right. We're going to say, hey, this component didn't work.
Yeah.
What do we need to do better here? And if you can't have that open dialogue on your team, you're not going to be able to move forward efficiently, effectively, which is very different than saying, hey, Jeff, you screwed that up. You keep screwing things up, right? I might have a separate conversation with you and saying, hey, Jeff, we need to align on how we do this better in the future. You see the distinct difference between like the individual feedback and the team.
So you almost need,
driving.
It sounds like the way I'm thinking about it is you almost need like a lowest common denominator that everyone agrees to. But then you can't forget the personal differences that, hey, Frank reacts best to feedback in writing. Mary prefers it on weekends over lunch, whatever it is, right?
Yep. And can I pause this for a second? Because I want to give a tactical feedback too.
Yeah.
There's something that I call the 5-minute rule, which is if you have an email or a Slack or a text message that you keep typing and deleting and typing and deleting, and it's taking you more than 5 minutes to just draft, delete it, pick up the phone, call the person, get up and walk to their desk, or simply video chat them.
Because it's complex enough that it merits an in-person discussion.
Feedback, I would say 9 times out of 10 is best delivered in person.
I hate feedback by email. I think email should be best for information or good news. Positive feedback, but not negative.
Not negative, and sometimes even not positive either. And you can give praise and things like that, but you can't fully get context in an email, in a Slack message, in a text message. Well, you might say, well, my team likes it, or my team's remote, or they're millennials, so they're always texting and chatting. I don't care. It is not the highest fidelity mode of communication. You can't understand the subtext to it because you read in and you build a story about it. And when you see that like text bubble, where you see someone's responding, they don't respond, and you're like, oh, what is that?
What didn't they say?
I said something. Was I texting? Did they see my text bubble? Right? You're building all this story, which likely isn't there if you just get on the phone and call the person or walk over and talk to them.
Yeah.
And so the best, like if you take away one tactical tool from just even this conversation, it's think of the 5-minute rule and apply it. It will save you so much time, effort, energy, because that email that you send with slightly passive aggressive nature will only get received with passive aggressive nature. And you're going to have to spend more time back and forth than a 5-minute call would take.
Totally agree. An early mentor taught me that email is just the single worst place to give negative feedback or corrective or instructive feedback. It's not the right forum for that, but so many people do it because they think it's faster, more convenient for them, but they actually do harm to the relationship, don't they?
It doesn't help anything. And it doesn't, because we're not used to this idea. And this is the idea. One of the things that comes out of Open, Honest, and Direct is that feedback is a gift. And the analogy I give around that is, would anybody play the game of basketball if it was played in the dark?
Yeah.
Likely no, because in the game of basketball, you shoot the ball and you get immediate feedback on, did it go in? Did it not?
Right.
Our role as leaders is to shine the light for our teams, to show them what's working, what's not working, not to make them feel bad, not to hurt them, not as a correct, but to really just show them what's working and what's not working so that they can be better for themselves.
What is the connection between this topic and the focus of your practice, which is millennials? In other words, how do millennials, for those of us that are clearly not, how do they prefer to receive feedback or have these discussions? I know it's hard to generalize, but for the audience who might be 40 or 50 or whatever, can you talk about the differences, the key differences?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk into the generalization, and then I'm gonna blow that generalization up. So I'm gonna do two things. So
Okay,
apologize
let's
for
do it.
the dichotomy here. Into the generalization is millennials, and this is also true about most human beings, is they want to feel like the company cares about their growth and development, like their boss cares about their growth and development. So the act of not giving feedback doesn't help their growth and development. So what they want is feedback, and you might say they want the pat on the back and they want the trophy, right? But what they're really looking for is to feel connected to their team, to their company, to their boss, to the impact, right? So they want impact and they want growth. And both those things are received through feedback.
Yeah.
Right? If you give me feedback on what's working, then I know the impact I'm having. If you give me feedback on what's not working, then I can adjust to have a better impact in the future. And then I'm growing too. And so what they might not say, and they being millennials, they might not say, I want feedback this way. They might say, I prefer it via Slack or via text message. And just because we say we want something doesn't mean that's
Yeah.
actually what we want. And just because someone doesn't feel good about the feedback when you give it to them in the moment doesn't mean that's not actually what they respect in the long term. Because if you give it to them as a gift, right? It's one thing to give it as a punitive damage, another thing to give it as a gift and say, hey, here is so that you can get better. Here's what I'm seeing and what I'm noticing. Without attachment to you being right, because you might be wrong, but your experience, likely your intuition is right. So there's that. Yeah, go ahead.
So with millennials, what I hear you saying is err on the side of more feedback than you might otherwise with older generations.
Oh yeah, way more feedback. We want to see that we are making impact. We want to identify our growth. Underneath those, you might hear, well, I want more money, or I want a new title, or I want this, that, and the other. What is more money really a signifier of? What's beneath that? It's a signifier that what I'm doing matters and I'm seen by my company and my boss. It's also a signifier that I'm growing. I can put it on LinkedIn. I can put it here and there. And so at the root of all of this is impact, connection, and growth. And the way to deliver that is by showing people you care, by giving them feedback that might not feel good because you care about them and their growth more than you care about your comfort.
Yeah, I wish this was easy. This is hard shit, isn't it? I mean, you run lectures and sessions all over the world, and you write this stuff and teach this stuff. You make it sound easy. Is there some truth to the concept that, Pat Lencioni was on the show recently, and he talked about humble, hungry, and smart, which were key characteristics or DNA of people that are inherently the kind of people you want to have on your team. Should you be recruiting people with certain characteristics that want and crave feedback, setting aside their age, whether they're millennials or not, and not hiring people who are just not open to feedback and who don't crave it? In other words, as leader, do you want to find people and add people to your team who crave feedback?
Yes. I'll give you a couple of reasons why. One is, my work with executive CEOs, the most successful ones. Someone asked me the other day, are they what's harder for them, giving feedback or receiving feedback? And hands down, and Jeff, I'm sure you could, from your experience working with leaders of all different sorts at all different organizations, you would say the best ones are much better at receiving it than giving it, because they're open, they want it, because feedback is a way, it's a data point. I talk about feedback as data points, and you might think it's an outlier and you don't need to listen to it, fine, but either way, you look at these data points. If you see enough outliers in the same direction, you might be saying, I need to pay attention.
Right.
And so you want people who are, it's a quote by Gino Wickman, who wrote the book Traction and the EOS system. And he says, the mind is like a parachute. It's got to be open for it to work. And really that highlights the way in which leaders that go through our training, which by the way, we simplify it and we make it easy, but it's 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months of hard work.
Yeah. It's not a skill you develop overnight, right? This is,
no, there are workshops, but you have homework assignments. You have to put in a play, you have coaching sessions, and then you have to build on that. And so we find the most success are the ones that have what we call a beginner's mindset. If you have a beginner's mindset, you're open, you're willing to learn, you're willing to grow. It's something that Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Capital, says. He says the smartest people I know are the ones who are who ask the best questions.
Yeah, they assume nothing, right?
Yeah, they don't think they know all the answers. And that's crucial to any team and to any successful organization.
Let's make this actionable again for the listeners. So if there are one or two things that they can start doing shy of going through your training or a longer session, what are the baby steps they can start to take today that can begin to make them more open and honest and direct with their team in a way that won't scare the shit out of either them or their team, who will say, "What happened to John? What where's this coming from? And is he being on the level with us, or is this going to go back? Is this a flavor of the day leadership change?"
Yeah, I'll give three, and one I've already said, that 5-minute rule.
Yeah, that 5-minute rule, no question.
Follow the 5-minute rule.
Yep.
The second one is be timely with that feedback. Don't wait weeks. 1 to 3 days is give that feedback pretty immediately so that someone can understand the impact of it was. Because if it's 2 weeks later, they're not going to necessarily know what they did or what they didn't do.
Which is why annual performance reviews are a joke, right? It's not recent enough.
No, it doesn't make sense. What happens in an annual performance review should be something that everybody is already aware of.
They shouldn't hear anything they haven't heard for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
A third one is critical, which is avoid using absolutes like always or never or can't or won't, because those usually just aren't true. They add a level of judgment to the situation. Jeff, you're always late. If I say that to you, you might say, well, in your head, no, Aaron, I wasn't late yesterday and I wasn't late the day before, right? That just puts you in a defensive situation back at me, as opposed to saying, Jeff, out of the last 5 meetings, you've been late 3 times. You might say, you're right. Totally right. I was, right? Which is very different than you're always late.
Yeah, because now we're on the same page. We can start to find solutions. Is it a meeting time issue or whatever it might be, right?
Things are rarely that absolute in life that there's always and nevers or can'ts or won'ts that should be attached to it.
What do you tell listeners or skeptics who would say, well, Steve Jobs seemed like a pretty good leader, built a pretty good company, but he didn't seem, at least if you believe what you read, didn't seem like the most open, honest, and direct person. Or maybe he was. He just had a rough kind of style, right?
Yeah, I would actually say, and in reading his biography and hearing stories about him, he was actually brutally open, honest, and
maybe
direct.
Too much, but at least he was, right?
Yeah, he was. He was like, this doesn't work. And from people that I've heard who've worked with him have said he was also willing to take it the same way he gave it. Right? He was willing to be wrong. He wanted to be questioned. He wanted to be challenged, because what he ultimately wanted to do was to create something better. Now, am I advocating for acting in the way Steve Jobs acted all the time in the workplace? No. We talk about being open, honest, and direct with tact.
Yeah, if you're Steve Jobs, you have permission to go act that way, right?
And you know what? I don't think so, because I think that creates a lack of psychological safety.
Yeah.
So there are ways in which people will say, and this is one of the reasons I'm not happy with the name of the book from time to time, which is like, I'm just being open, honest, and direct with you, Aaron. I'm like, yeah, but
not really.
There's not tact and grace here. You're just sharing your opinion with me in a loud way.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some tact and grace. And I think Steve was open, honest, and direct from, very, very outsider perspective, but also I think there's some tact and grace that could have been delivered there too.
I give you so much credit for shining a light on this topic. It's incredibly important. It's incredibly difficult. And I wish I was better at it. I think most leaders wish they were better at it. I think your book is a great place to start. How can people learn more about your practice, your seminars, your speaking, your coaching sessions, and the book as well?
Yeah, so they can go to openhonestanddirect.com is one way. And there's a whole toolkit and some of these tips that we talked about you can put into play and download and get to use right away, and find more about what we do. You can also go to raisebar.co. That's RAISEBAR.co, and find out all that we do. And our focus is on building better leaders, and who we do that with and how we do it.
Aaron Levy, I give you a ton of credit. Thank you so much for making the time. We're going to have you on again for your next book. When will that be out?
I don't even know. I'm recovering from this one. Thanks so much for having me on. This was a blast.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Thanks again.
Take care.